Thank you, Senator Perdue.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here, and thank you for your illustrious service here over 30 years. Puts you in a unique perspective to talk to us today. I want to come back to your comments in your opening. I agree with you so much. I just believe we are at a moment of challenge. I mean, I see this as a very dangerous world. I respect so much what you're doing in this position to try to deal with that. You also mentioned that we need to lead, and I couldn't agree with that more. But I see two things you've also mentioned as well that really create challenges, and I sense the frustration in your testimony today relating to one of these. And first of all, this national security crisis relative to the threats, not just abroad, but even here at home, relative to the threats abroad between a nuclear Iran, an ISIL that is really running rampant around the Middle East and threatening even our homeland, and then, of course, what's going on in the Ukraine and Russia. But you mentioned also our fiscal irresponsibility and what the questions that raises around the world relative to our ability to back up our agreements, our ability to fund our military, and our ability to really live up to the leadership role that has been thrust upon us. You know, you mentioned budget constraints, and listen, I recognize that frustration. As an outsider, I see this fairly uniquely as someone new to the process, but I'd like to get your sense of priorities, particularly on just one example of how you see in this budgeting process relative to all that we just mentioned and all that you've talked about. How do you determine priorities and our ability to really do what we've got to do against your objectives? And one is a specific. I spent last week in Israel, and I stood on the Golan Heights, and I looked across into Syria, and I saw these three villages where fighting is going on, and it's a very confused space. But then I went to the West Bank, and I saw both sides of that equation. You know, in 2016 budget, the administration is requesting almost $500 million in aid to the Palestinian territories of both Gaza and West Bank. Earlier this year, the Palestinian Authority was allowed access to an International Criminal Court, and this is a troubling position that they'll no doubt try to they'll attempt to use to bring charges against Israel. But independently yesterday, and this leads to my question. A federal district court in Manhattan ruled that the Palestinian Authority, independently, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization were both liable for their role in knowingly supporting 6 terrorist attacks in Israel between 2004 and 2006, actually in which Americans were killed. So my question is, that $500 million that's being requested there, could that be used in different ways to deal with some of the things that you're talking about, certainly on some of the social media counterbalance with ISIL and some of the cybersecurity issues you've talked about? It's a small number, but it's a principal thing. And my question is how do you see that very complex priority set as you try to develop the highest and best use for your budget?
Great question, Senator, and I want to tackle both parts of it. With respect to the $450 million, $500 that you talk about to the Palestinians, you asked bluntly, could it better go to something else? And the answer is no. Of the $450 million budget support for the Palestinian Authority, $425 million goes to Israeli institutions, including utilities and creditors of the PA. So effectively, it's going to Israel. It's not going to Palestine, but it helps Palestinians to survive. Now, why is that important? It's critical. If the Palestinian Authority were to fail, and I warned about this in London the other day because they're not getting the transfer of the tax revenues because they're going to the ICC. But if they were to fail, what takes their place? Hamas? Jihad? I don't know. I just know that as troublesome as they have been in certain respects at many times, that President Abbas remains committed to a nonviolent, peaceful approach to a two-state solution, and he remains committed to a two-state solution. Now, that has to be put to the test at some point in time, and I understand the difficulties Israel has had with them and him and so forth, having taken part in those negotiations for a long period of time. We objected. We do not believe Palestinians have the right to accede to the ICC because we do not believe they are a state in standing to be able to go to the ICC. And we made that argument. We made it to as did other countries, by the way. A number of other countries made that argument. but we lost. And we also forcefully advocated to the Palestinian leadership, don't do this. It's a mistake. You're going to breach, you're going to create all kinds of hurdles to the possibilities of the future. This is a mistake, but they're out of patience. And we couldn't contain that, and as you know, they went to the UN. And I spent 3 weeks over Christmas holiday working to keep people that we would like to be working with constructively from doing something negative. And in the end, by a vote, they didn't get the 9 votes at the UN, and so we never had to exercise a veto. But there's a great deal of frustration building, and this is not the moment to go into it in any depths. You know, we're very anxious not to get dragged into the election process. We're not going to. Israel has this important election coming up, and they need to do it without us kibitzing from the sidelines. So I'm not going to go further on this. I just say to you that we wish the Palestinians had behaved differently. And that's why they're not getting aid right now. And therefore, maybe some other people, we think others are going to step up and try to help bridge the gap in order to get them over the hurdle. But when the Israeli elections are over, there's going to be a need to quickly begin to try to decide where everybody's going thereafter so that there is not an irretrievable clash that takes place with respect to the ICC or otherwise and prevents any further activity. On the first part of your question, just a very important part of the question, the Golan Heights, and you sort of talked about the budget as a whole and where we need to go. The need for the United States to step, I mean, I went through that list of things in the beginning: Ebola, ISIL, Afghanistan, the Maghreb, the Sahel, Somalia, Mali, Boko Haram, Yemen, Houthis, the region, still Al-Qaeda in the western part of Pakistan. I mean, you can run through the gamut of these challenges, and you got to recognize that it is the United States who usually helps to convene or becomes a central part of the convening, working with our key allies, Britain, France, Germany, other members of the P5. But we need to be able to make a difference to some of these countries. There's a different world we're living in now. After World War II, most of the world's economies were destroyed, and we were in great debt, but we came out of the recession by virtue of the war machine that was built up. And for 50 years or so, there was a pretty polarized East-West, sort of bipolar decision-making process, and it was a lot easier. Ever since the Berlin Wall fell and nations sprung up reclaiming their individuality and their personal aspirations and defining themselves differently and free and democratic, the economies of the world have changed. And now you have the BRICS, you have China, India, Brazil, Mexico, others, South Korea, people, all playing a different role, a different impact. And many of them are donor countries. So others are playing a more mercantilistic, voracious game in the marketplace of ideas and products than we are. And we have been hamstrung by this budgeting process here in Washington that is not allowing us to actually meet our own priorities and serve our own interests. And I can make a much longer, and I won't do it now, argument of how it specifically affects us in instance after instance. I'll give you just one example. Recently, the Prime Minister of a great country was here. I'm not going to go into the details of who. The most we were able to do was provide a loan guarantee when what they really needed were billions of dollars to help them move forward and make a difference. And if they get them from other places will actually wind up having greater impact and influence than we do.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.